That'll help. Sorry. My apologies. Welcome once again. My name is Mike Wooldridge. Welcome to this side event of the meeting on food safety, a right or a privilege. And we will begin by hearing both from the FAO and the WHO, and from the FAO, Ren Wang, Assistant Director General of Agriculture and Consumer Protection Department.
Thank you very much, Professor Wooldridge. My name is Ren Wang. I'm Assistant Director General for the Agriculture and Consumer Protection Department of FAO. This department houses the Secretary of the Codex Alimentary Commission, as well as the Food Safety Unit, which are very relevant to this event. So on behalf of FAO, I'd like to take the honor to welcome you, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to this FAO-WHO side event, which puts focus on the issue of food safety as an essential element of food and nutrition security. FAO considers it critical to raise awareness of this issue. Food safety needs more attention now to address current problems and to put us in good stead to manage emerging and new problems as they arise. Otherwise, our global development goals will not be achieved. In this context, it is important to recognize that feeding future generations means producing more and producing safely while preserving our natural resource base. And those are the key messages that I would like to deliver, and I will not take too much of your time and rather leave you sufficient time, I hope, to interact with the distinguished panelists. Thank you very much, and look forward to this very important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And now Dr. Angelika Tritcher on behalf of the World Health Organization.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I will be very short. Also on behalf of the World Health Organization, I would like to welcome you to this side event on food safety. So food safety is not very prominent on the agenda of this important conference. However, it is clear that food safety is and has to be an integral part of food and nutrition security. And this is reflected in the Rome Declaration, where food safety is mentioned several times, and in the framework of action there are 5 specific recommended actions related to food safety and antimicrobial resistance. So the production of safe food is also a contribution to sustainable development. We talk a lot now about the 2015, post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. And the production of safe food is a shared responsibility. So this important concept of shared responsibility for safe food production is ever more important in a globalized world. And to raise awareness to this fact, the World Health Organization has dedicated the World Health Day in 2015 on April 7th to food safety. So hopefully we will be able all together to raise more awareness to this important subject, and I'm looking very much forward to this panel discussion, and I thank you very much for your participation.
Again, thanks very much indeed. Well, 4 weeks ago today, I was in the small town of Korum in the highlands of northern Ethiopia. Exactly 30 years earlier, I had been in Korum as part of the BBC team that finally managed to get access to the epicenter of the 1984 Ethiopian famine, which was, of course, one of the greatest disasters of modern times, killing eventually hundreds of thousands of people. Other factors involved too, of course, but acute, deadly hunger for me at its most unimaginable. 30 years on, thankfully, a happier story to tell. But aside from that and other food emergencies I've witnessed at first hand over the years of reporting, I've also seen and reported on more frequently the corrosive impact of chronic undernutrition and of food and waterborne diseases. And in both the emergencies and in the most hard-pressed places, the daily struggle to survive, to bring up and provide for families and to earn a livelihood, I've seen the extraordinary lengths so many people go to in an effort to cope, the resourcefulness they employ. Travelling from homestead to homestead a few years back in rural South Sudan, I will never forget the response of one mother as she was being told how she could keep her family healthier and prepare food more safely if she used soap. "Do you want me," she asked them, "to buy soap or food? I cannot buy both." And the challenges across the world in many different ways around food safety in the context of food security that we're focusing on at this event are, of course, huge. Writing in the journal The Lancet today, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Margaret Chan, says that in 2015, WHO will publish for the first time estimates of the global burden of food-borne disease. So that, she says, next year the world will see more clearly the scale of the problem. She goes on, foodborne disease is largely underreported. A global scandal is often needed to stir the collective consciousness on food safety, and then the threat is largely forgotten until the next emergency. Well, in a moment, our panel here will explore the challenge, what's being done to address it, and what needs to be done from their different perspectives. But first, to frame the discussion, we have for you a video specially produced for this event.
Here in Bangladesh, rapid population growth is increasing the pressure upon the nation's natural resources. And farmers must make the most of limited amounts of land by intensifying and diversifying production while ensuring the food produced is safe. Now, many have turned to aquaculture. In fact, fish reared in ponds like these currently provide as much as 60% of the nation's animal protein. Salma Yasmin is an aquaculture farmer in Jessore district.
আমি মাছ চাষ করতাম এবং গরু পালন করছি হাঁস মুরগি এর যে খাদ্যটা আমরা প্রোটিন জাতীয় মাছ বেশি বেশি খাই এবং বাড়ির ডিম আছে মুরগির এবং আমার গোয়ালের গরুর দুধ
Salma is fortunate. Undernutrition is a major problem here, and unsafe food, contaminated water and poor sanitation further lead to reduced absorption of nutrients in vulnerable individuals. However, Salma is now benefiting from government training in safe food production, which has raised her awareness of the dangers of foodborne illnesses.
দেখা যাচ্ছে কি আমরা যে দোকান থেকে খাদ্য নিয়ে আসি আগে তো মুরগির বিষ্ঠা গোবর টোবর এই সবগুলো দিতাম তাদের সহযোগিতায় এখন সেসবগুলো পুরোটাই বাদ এখন দেখা যাচ্ছে কি এইগুলো মাছের যখনই যাচ্ছে তখনই মানুষের দেহের ভিতরেই যাচ্ছে কিন্তু ঠিক আছে
Such good practices prevent bacterial pathogens, parasites and chemical residues from entering the food chain and causing illness, which not only benefits Salma's family, but also members of the community who buy her fish. And producing safer food has also improved her marketing opportunities.
আমাদের জীবনে খুব কষ্ট ছিল এখন আমরা কষ্ট নেই আমরা খুব এখন মানে স্বাবলম্বী হয়েছি
With 12.5% of the global population suffering from chronic hunger, many countries around the world also need to increase food production in order to meet their food security needs. The four pillars of food security are availability of food, access to that food, utilization in terms of how our bodies use food, and a stable environment. And food safety plays a key role in each of these. Food availability can be seriously undermined when food is no longer fit for consumption due to contamination by excessive residues, mycotoxins, or pathogenic organisms.
Food security and food safety are very much interconnected. Handling of the food can cause a big problem. Both the food can become contaminated and therefore it will be difficult to sell that food, let alone eating the food. So the two are very much interconnected.
The second pillar, access to food, is also related to access to markets. Income generation can be a key to food security. Producing safe food is critical for this and can directly contribute to better nutrition through the raising of incomes and employment levels.
FAO in Bangladesh is promoting the domestic consumption, but we're also promoting the export, because obviously better income means better ability to buy food, access to food in the marketplace.
However, in cases of food insecurity, the focus is often on availability and access to food, with little consideration of safety. Food utilisation addresses not only how much food people eat, but also what and how they eat. Benefiting nutritionally from the food we consume can only be achieved if the food does not cause other problems. When food is unsafe, the nutritionally vulnerable suffer even more. Globally, every year approximately 2 million people die from diarrheal diseases from contaminated food and water. 80 to 100% of children in some African countries are chronically exposed to aflatoxins, which are not only carcinogenic, but there's also growing evidence that they are directly linked to stunting. And approximately 56 million people are currently infected with foodborne trematodes, a parasite found in meat. Of these, 7.9 million have severe symptoms, and over 7,000 people die annually. Also, with increased demands for meat comes a need for increased vigilance in monitoring the use of antimicrobial drugs, as their misuse is contributing to concerns about growing antimicrobial resistance. Improving the safety of food requires appropriate government standards and oversight, in conjunction with effective practices by all operators along the food chain.
The public health inspectors who do routine monitoring and surveillance of food outlets in the Cook Islands, I think, has helped to probably curb the foodborne disease outbreaks.
While good practice starts on the farm with the safety of feed, it must be maintained throughout the whole food chain, all the way to the consumer.
Everybody has a role to play to ensure that food is safe. We don't leave it to the regulatory agencies alone. Everybody in their own little way has to do their own little part to ensure that the food is safe.
If we want to ensure food and nutrition security, we have to increase our efforts to provide safe food for all. There can be no food security without food safety.
Sorry, didn't realise it had gone off. I'll just, in case you didn't catch that, a first presentation from Dr. Rajita Senaratne, Minister of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources Development in Sri Lanka, who, soon after assuming office in 2010, embarked on a programme to increase national fish production very significantly. And his country is therefore a good place to look at the trends and challenges facing fish food safety. Now, unfortunately, he can't be present, and his presentation will be read for him by Dr. Subha Singha, who is advisor to the Fisheries Ministry. We'll do the presentations just from where we're sitting, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Am I loud enough? Can you hear? Well, thank you. I feel very honored to address this important gathering on behalf of Dr. Rajita, who couldn't be with us this afternoon due to some unforeseen circumstances. Well, talking about Sri Lanka, food security in relation to fisheries and the food safety aspect, I must say that fish is a primary source of animal protein for most countries in Asia and the Pacific. including Sri Lanka, an island nation strategically located in the Indian Ocean. Over 70% of the animal protein intake of its population of over 20 million comes from fish. Country's fish production increased from 329,000 metric tons in 2009 to 512,000 metric tons in 2013. This was due to the diversification of the marine fishing effort, increased aquaculture production, which has almost doubled during this period to 90,000 metric tons, and the management of fisheries through the banning of destructive fishing methods such as trawling, using small mesh nets, light fishing, use of explosives, etc. The focus on increased production was to increase the per capita consumption of fish from 11 kilograms in 2009, and it's presently at 16 kg, to 22 kilograms by 2016, in order to achieve the WHO recommended intake of 60 grams of protein per day, animal protein rather. This has become a challenge due to the artisanal nature of the fisheries. The entire marine fleet, which produces over 85% of the total fish production, having only 35 vessels of over 15 meters. As such, marine fisheries has a heavy livelihood focus, providing direct and indirect employment to nearly 1 million, nearly 40% of them being women. In spite of their relatively small size, multi-day vessels of the marine fleet ventures into deeper waters and fish for relatively long periods of time, using chilling and salting as the main form of onboard preservation. The domestic product range includes mostly fresh or chilled fish, salted fish, canned fish, frozen fish, and smoked dry tuna in order of priority. Canned fish and salted dry fish is the most important source of animal protein for low-income groups, inland and plantation sector populations. Government has successfully enhanced domestic production of these items to ensure food security through livelihood development programs such as Divinaguma, and setting up 4 private canneries. Parallel to these efforts, aquaculture expansion through the stocking of inland reservoirs and water bodies has helped to double the freshwater fish production over the last 5 years. In order to ensure quality and safety of fish marketed, Sri Lanka has embarked on an integrated fisheries infrastructure development program. Among them is the setting up of 9 new fishery harbors, upgrading of 26 harbors, and a large number of landing sites with improved hygienic facilities, potable water, and ice freezing facilities. Marketing network too has expanded with the setting up of a modern central wholesale fish market and a network of 175 fish retail outlets by the Ceylon Fisheries Corporation, it's a government, semi-government body, throughout the island to provide quality fish at a competitive price to both urban and rural populations. Meanwhile, the private sector too has actively contributed in driving this quality safety message to the consumers by introducing improved fish marketing and product presentation methods. Sri Lanka has a well-ingrained fish inspection scheme enacted under the Food Act and the Fisheries Act. Of course, in this respect, the Director General of Health is the key personality who directs the provisions of the Food Act through his medical MHO, Medical Officers of Health, and about, I think, 330 medical staffs and a large number of food inspectors and public health inspectors as well. Under the Fisheries Act, we have provisions to enact quality of fish, and in this respect, we have about 190 fish inspectors working, engaged in this activity. These activities are supported by 6 accredited analytical laboratories and an active training and capacity building program. Annual fish exports worth over US $270 million account to around 6% of the total landings by volume. Sri Lanka works closely with the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission of FAO to ensure traceability and accountability of its exports, and enjoyed a 51% compliance rate with IOTC resolutions by 2013, and much more now. Sri Lanka is now in the process of establishing a Euro 8 million vessel monitoring system to strengthen this process of vessel tracking to address some specific market requirements. With the implementation of the planned fisheries developmental programs under the Mahinda Chintana policy framework of the government, Sri Lanka expects to lay a strong foundation to fulfill the fish requirements of Sri Lanka and address the nation's food security and fish safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that picture from Sri Lanka. And our next speaker is Dr. Romano Marabelli, Secretary General of the Ministry of Health here in Italy and the country's Chief Veterinary Officer. He was President of the World Organization for Animal Welfare from 2001 to 2003 and is currently its Honorary President. He's also held many international positions, and he will, among other things, look at the contribution of the animal health sector to food safety. Dr. Marabelli.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I am here especially on behalf of the OAI organization and of the Dr. Valar, that is the General Director of OAI that could not attend to this meeting. The demand for animal protein continue to rise at an exponential rate with increases in human population and disposable income in large developing countries. In many developing and emerging countries, animal production is critical to the alleviation of poverty, nutrition and food security, sustainable development and social well-being. Animal health and veterinary public health are fundamental to food safety, food security and nutrition. Just to make an example, I would like to draw your attention to the importance of the fight against a transboundary animal disease, threatening food security and nutrition, in particular for the developing country. Both FAO and OAI, with the donor countries, have identified some animal disease causing the loss of a large amount of meat production and of other foodstuffs of animal origin. I am actually referring to some plagues to the animal population, such as foot and mouth disease, peste de petit ruminant, and avian influenza. Once eradicated rinderpest, these are the diseases proving more economic damage to the affected country, above all to the developing and emerging one. Such countries inevitably lose large amount of protein for their inhabitants and are excluded from the international market of these products. In order to completely eradicate foot and mouth disease and peste de petit ruminant by 2025, some plans shared at regional and global level have been arranged, but they need to be effectively supported at local and international level. Foodborne zoonoses are another example of how animal health and veterinary public health are fundamental for food safety and food security and nutrition. Traditional foodborne zoonoses such as cysti echinoctosis, trichinellosis, cysticercosis, or salmonella, tuberculosis, etc., along with the emerging zoonoses such as avian influenza, coronavirus, etc., could cause serious damage to the human hand, as well as serious loss to animal production, once again, especially in countries where control and prevention measures could be inadequate. Unsafe food resulting in foodborne illness country to the poverty and malnutrition by reducing absorption of nutrients through diarrhea and other correlated disease. Since not all the zoonoses cause clinical diseases in animals, active surveillance, early detection and responsible management at animal and farm level are essential to mitigate the risks of contamination of animal production entering to the food in the food supply. From these points of view, the cooperation between the public service veterinary and medical service, and the private sector is fundamental. In addition, the prudent and responsible use of veterinary drugs, including antibiotics, therapeutics, parasiticides, anti-helminthics, etc., is fundamental to ensure safe and good nutritional foods. In order to achieve the above-mentioned goal, food safety must become everywhere a right and not a privilege. Food safety must become a culture of commitment to continuous learning and improvement that is required on the part of all stakeholders along the food supply chain, including producers, feed companies, transporters, packers, processors, retailers, consumers, with the guidance of the competent authorities. Thank you very much.
Drawing on Norway's experience, he will now broaden out, I hope, the discussion to consider other aspects of food safety policy and their relation to public health.
Thank you very much. Food safety is a critical element of being able to offer the population a healthy diet. Unfortunately, hunger disasters and lack of food and drinking water is often closely connected to lack of well-functioning food safety systems. Unsafe food and drinking water represents a major public health threat to any population, ranging from food-induced diarrhea, critical for vulnerable groups, to the increasing challenge of antimicrobial infections. In a country like Norway, where in general the food supply is of high quality, the general public has high expectations and demands that food and water provided should be safe. Consumer, health, and environmental advocate groups are active in promoting regulations and supervision in order to secure such a safe food supply. As new threats to the safety of water and food emerges, food safety is a major concern also in Norway, and an integrated food chain approach to achieving food safety is practiced. This is illustrated by recent work on the challenges we face due to antimicrobial drug resistance and recommendations for how to address it. Work that was commissioned by 4 ministries of the Norwegian government, namely the Ministry of Health and Care Services, the Ministry of Climate and Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Fisheries, thus illustrating the need for close collaboration between public health authorities, animal health authorities, feed and food production authorities, and also environmental authorities. Furthermore, collaboration with and involvement from food producers and industry is critical, as is multidisciplinary research efforts. Prevention, applying a wide set of educational and policy measures, is a key strategy in order to reduce the prevalence of microbial infections. Surveillance of animals, fish, feed and food, as well as of the environment, is critical, and efforts are undertaken to keep the use of antibiotics as low as possible. In Norway, 87% of the total consumption of antibiotics today goes to humans, and only 10% to farm animals and 3% to fish. Particularly within the large fish farming industry, research linked, for instance, to the development of vaccines has contributed to the current low use of antibiotics. Surveillance programs on the human and non-human side are continuously and closely integrated. When a transmission chain is identified among humans, the food authorities are quick to sample suspected infectious sources. Data are confirmed and compared, and confirmed infection sources are withdrawn from the market. In order to tackle the challenge of antimicrobial resistance, a joint program initiative of the European Union has identified priority topics in order to form a strategic research agenda. And this agenda is based on the agreed vision that no individual country is capable of handling the challenge of antimicrobial resistance by itself. WHO, in close cooperation with the World Animal Health Organization and also FAO, will next year launch a global action plan against antimicrobial resistance. This plan will strongly encourage increased intersectoral and international collaboration and address the very different challenges in various countries and parts of the world. This wide international political engagement demonstrates that antimicrobial resistance is acknowledged and a serious health and food safety challenge, even in a country like Norway, where the prevalence of antimicrobial resistance still is low compared to many other countries around the world. This acknowledgement is important, as we all know that international trading of animals, food and feed, and travel is increasingly common, and we no longer can consider individual countries as separate epidemiological settings. We all travel to various parts of the world, and imported foods are found in all supermarkets around the planet. Thus, we are exposed to infectious agents, including those that carry antimicrobial resistant genes when we travel, but also in our domestic environment. So, in conclusion, the challenge of food safety applies to all countries and needs to be approached on both national and international level. Thank you.
Settled. Never put broadcasters anywhere near microphones, I think is the answer to that. Ambassador Mary Mubi, our fourth speaker, is highly experienced in the place of food safety issues in policy making, governmental and in international organizations. She's Senior Principal Director in the Office of the President and Cabinet in Zimbabwe, and former permanent representative of the Zimbabwe government to the FAO, WFP, and IFAD. Her professional roots were in community development, and so she brings that perspective to all of the challenges around food safety too. Ambassador Mubi.
Thank you very much. I see my role as making the case for food safety. Why are we talking about food safety today? And I will bring perspectives from my own continent where the issues of food safety still remain very much of a challenge, and our systems are not as well developed as obviously we've had the case of Norway. Foodborne diseases, illnesses contribute to decreased family productivity, disability, and even death, thus lowering incomes and access to food. Foodborne illnesses also contribute to human suffering in our region. There is a high incidence of diarrheal disease in African children, estimated at 3.3 to 4.1 episodes per child per year. Whilst there is growing focused attention on post-harvest losses, and we have discussed this many times at UNICEF, at FAO, equal attention must be given to food losses through high incidence of diarrhea. It is estimated that 800,000 African children die each year from diarrheal diseases and dehydration. Because of the high HIV and AIDS prevalence in sub-Saharan Africa, populations are at greater risk to unsafe food as their immune systems are already compromised. Foodborne diseases are one of the most important underlying factors for malnutrition and indirectly for respiratory tract infections for developing countries, including my own. Repeated episodes of foodborne diseases over a period of time can lead to malnutrition with a serious impact on the growth of the immune systems of infants and children. Food safety systems in many African countries generally are weak, fragmented, and not well coordinated, and not effective enough to protect the health of consumers and enhance the competitiveness of food exports. Thus, practices aimed at improving food safety also reduce food losses and increase food availability. Further, countries are able to improve food safety, are also able to take advantage of international trade opportunities. And this, for many African countries now, is an emerging issue, the issue of trade and markets. And I think we need to take the opportunity, particularly for those in food safety, to use this opportunity, because as many countries try and increase their trade, they are also having to look at the issues of food safety in terms of meeting the various standards, be they global or regional. Kenya was able to increase export of fish to the EU from 742 metric tons to 2,818 in 2001 as a result of strengthened food security measures. Where there is inadequate food safety measures, there is a potential flow of substandard and unsafe food in the country. We are all very much part of the global community. We are part of the global food chains, and many countries are vulnerable to the fact that we don't have food safety systems in place to be able to stop those products that are coming into the country that are unsafe for our populations. So in terms of the focus of food security or food safety, we believe that these are sufficient reasons to make it an issue that needs to be very much part of our agenda. And lastly, making the case for food safety in terms of our ministers of finance, I think we just have to look at the amount of money that is spent, the budgets that are spent on the diarrheal diseases and those things that are associated with diseases which are a direct result of lack of food safety measures, the cost of treatment, and then of course in terms of the trade opportunities that arise once we have robust food safety systems in place. So I think with those two issues, really there is a strong case for ensuring that food safety becomes high very much on the agenda, because at the end of the day, the food losses that result from diarrheal diseases could be in fact more devastating than those we've currently been debating, the post-harvest losses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so to the food industry. And our next speaker, David Crean, Global Vice President, Corporate Research and Development with Mars Incorporated. Now, he has responsibility, I'm told, for the entire Mars supply chain to ensure food safety and quality for this $35 billion family-owned business. Among other things, he's led the development of a new Mars Global Food Safety Center in China. So, his feet today planted at the highest levels of global corporate business, but he also has a degree in applied biology with specialism in microbial pathogenicity and virology. David, Margaret Chan points out in her Lancet article today that food chains now extend over thousands of kilometers, crossing many borders, and that an error by a food producer in one country can affect the health of consumers on the other side of the planet. Do you believe that industry has to accept primary responsibility for food safety, and if so, how's it measuring up?
Sorry, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Industry, large, small, local, global, has a prime accountability to deliver safe food to its consumers. If you can't deliver safe food, you don't actually have an industry, you don't have a business, you don't have a supply chain. Is it getting more difficult to do that? Are the risks increasing? Is the complexity increasing? And I think the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Food supply chains are becoming more interconnected, they're becoming more globalized. What happens in one place is readily apparent in other places through social media, through communications. So food safety incidents travel at the speed of light around the world. Food safety incidents are not just the traditional things that we see. So we've heard some appalling statistics about the numbers of people who are affected by salmonella, by other bacterial issues, by zoonoses, and it's pretty worrying. But that's not just about the developing world. If we look at the US, CDC did some great work to estimate how many people in the US are affected by foodborne illness. This was for 2011, and it was 1 in 6 people in a developed country affected by food safety issues. So not only are we a global supply chain, it's all interconnected, but we have a global risk. It's affecting everybody. I think those risks are different depending on where you are in the world. The risks are different depending on where you are on the supply chain. But how we approach them has got to be a coordinated effort. And I think industry is front and centre in helping to address those issues. It needs to be front and centre in helping address those issues. We've heard a lot about aflatoxin, mycotoxins, and I just wanted to add another statistic. Mycotoxins, 4.5 billion people are exposed annually to mycotoxins. We've heard about aflatoxin affecting stunting, and I know that at our factory gate, when we test materials that are coming into our factory, we can have very high levels of rejection due to mycotoxins. And well, that's great, isn't it? Because as a business, we're doing what we should be doing. We're finding those contaminated materials, we're identifying them, and we reject them. And I'd love to tell you that those materials are then removed from the food supply chain. But I think they're removed from our premises, not necessarily from the food supply chain. And it can't be that through differential application of standards, global standards, that we have an inadvertent creation of an A and B supply chain. This is not acceptable, and we need to address it. So if we think about, another conversation I find very interesting is we talk about food security and the key elements of food security, and we talk about food nutrition, we talk about, we've got to have sufficient food, safe food, nutritious food, almost like they're separate elements. And actually it's one thing. If food's not safe, is it food? And my suggestion would be it's not food. It needs to be something else and taken away pretty quickly and worked on. There are no systems that do not have failures. There are no systems that are perfect. And what we've got the opportunity to do is to look at each system that we have and to share the understanding that we have. Now, I've talked to people about this space of food safety being pre-competitive, and I get very skeptical responses to that idea. Does industry really want to collaborate? But nobody profits from unsafe food. Industries suffer significantly, economies suffer significantly, and the human cost is simply unacceptable. So everybody's got to work together to get safe food, and sharing how we do that, sharing best practice, is a key accountability of business. And so, for example, in Mars Incorporated, I would love to say that because I'm in Mars Incorporated, our food is safer. Sadly, that's not true. It's because of the 78,000 associates in Mars Incorporated who are highly motivated, who take pride in what they do, who want to make safe food that they feed to their families. It's because they take care that Mars Incorporated, I hope, produces high-quality, safe food. And so how do you make sure that we get the right people involved, we share the right information, and we share those practices to smaller businesses, to smaller stakeholders, and to smaller farmers, where it's essential. If you think about the food issue, business has a role to play in that we can test what we get coming in, and that's great for identifying issues, isn't it? Because we can test it. Sadly, testing is just simply not enough. Statistically, we cannot ever take enough samples to ensure that we get safe food. We've got to understand our suppliers. We've got to understand their practices and how they operate. And once we understand, are we operating at an acceptable level of risk, then testing forms a kind of verification role. But testing in itself isn't the answer. It's deep understanding of every element of the supply chain and pulling that together to know the final result in terms of risk that you present to the consumer that's very important. We have 140 factories operating in 74 countries. Each of those factories has hundreds of suppliers. What we're beginning to realize is that we have an unparalleled overview of food safety. The data that we get, and we're not very good yet at using, but the data that we get is incredible. And so when we talk about in 2015, we'll get a better understanding of the burden of foodborne illness, and that it's probably right now that we're underestimating that. I think that's a true statement. I think we are truly underestimating the impact of foodborne illness and the presence of food adulterants, whether natural or put there by criminal activity, that are in the supply chain. Perhaps a new role for business is supplying that data and helping to survey the supply chains that we have so that we can understand where we have risks, so that we can understand where we have new things emerging that perhaps we haven't seen before. And one of the things that keeps me awake at night is melamine. Well, not the fact that melamine occurred, the fact that I don't know what the next melamine might be, and I don't know what to test for, and I don't know where it might emerge. But right now, somebody is probably doing something to our food supply chain that is entirely unacceptable and criminal. And how do we make sure that that doesn't get widely distributed and cause huge damage? So I'd really like to finish off by saying that as we look differently at food supply, as we look differently at the contribution that business can make, we need new collaborations. In our business, we talk about uncommon collaborations. So we've had lots of collaborations up to now. We've made some great progress, and some industry groups have been pretty effective. But we need to take it to the next level and recognize that actually we are in a global system of food supply. Food safety does not occur or occur in one country or in one region. It is truly global. And industry has a key role to play in those collaborations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Well, before we open this up to your comments and questions, our final speaker is Lorian Univere, Professor Emerita Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Now, she speaks from the background of a career of more than 30 years as an agricultural economist. And among the places she's worked are the International Food Policy Research Institute and the International Rice Research Institute. And her research has focused on how the food system can better respond to emerging demands for benefits in public health. You, Lauren, will hopefully be able to draw on all of that to pull some of these many strands together.
Thank you. So we've heard from our various panelists about some of what's needed to provide more food, more nutritious food, and safer food. And I'd like to focus on the enabling policy environment that's needed to address food safety, particularly for food insecure populations. Fortunately, during the past 2 decades, we've seen the emergence of a global consensus on the appropriate policy approach. That is, that food safety has to be addressed through a risk-based, farm-to-table, preventative approach. And we have successful examples even in least developed countries, which is also quite encouraging. So what does this mean in practice? Well, risks have to be managed from farm to table because hazards can enter at multiple points. Some kinds of hazards can multiply once present. And then through the food system can be distributed, as we've heard, widely and expose many consumers to safety risks. Furthermore, they may be undetectable to the consumer at point of purchase. So how do you manage food safety in a system like that? Well, it requires the adoption of risk reduction practices at critical points in the supply chain, as well as changes in market institutions to monitor and verify that those practices have taken place, and incentives for the value chain actors involved. So one nice example is Twin, a UK NGO that has been working with peanut farmers and producers in Malawi to reduce aflatoxins. And looking at the value chain there, they identified a few simple points for intervention. First, improve storage practices facilitated through a warehouse receipt program. Second, the adoption of simple mechanical hullers, because soaking to make hand hulling easy was promoting the growth of aflatoxins, and providing subsidized loans or other ways to facilitate that simple mechanization. Third, testing and diverting hazardous product to alternative processed uses. So this is an example of just simple changes in practices along the value chain, facilitated again by some basic changes in incentives and market institutions. So what's the public sector's role in all that, in addressing food safety? I think beyond the basics of standards and enforcement, there's a broader range of public activities that are needed to support a risk-based preventative approach that spans the entire supply chain. So starting first in terms of public activities that support a focus on the most important risks. And that begins with risk analysis, which may not need to be replicated everywhere, may draw upon regional or international sources of data and analysis, but to understand and identify which hazards are most important and how they can be controlled. What are the industry costs and the public health benefits from such controls? And ultimately, through that process, to understand where public efforts should be focused. As part of that, a dialogue with the private sector is critical in order to understand what's actually feasible and where critical public investments may be needed, for example, to support a secure cold chain or to provide better hygiene at wet markets. Understanding that is only going to be informed through a dialogue with the private sector. And finally, as part of all this, some foresight regarding the dynamics of risks, with changing diets leading to different kinds of risk exposures, changes in production practices, intensification of production may be complementary to improve food safety, for example, when better agronomics reduces aflatoxin incidence at the farm level, or may have trade-offs when intensification of production may lead to potential residues in food. And that, of course, alludes to the policy coherence discussed widely here, and the need for that coherence among agriculture, nutrition, public health, and I would add food safety authorities. So that's the broad supporting picture for setting policies and identifying policy directions. What kinds of things in the farm and supply chain would be useful? So public-private partnerships, of which we have many examples around the world now, can facilitate supply chain coordination and improve food safety management. The public sector can provide training, capacity building, cost sharing, and can facilitate farmer groups or cooperatives that may provide the mechanisms for monitoring, certification, and capturing value from improved food safety. We have specific examples in countries and different crops in India, Kenya, and Guatemala. Those kinds of partnerships can be important where enforcement capacity is limited because they can extend the reach of the public sector in addressing hazards, and particularly where the costs of risk reduction are high. So finally, public sector activities are needed at the table or consumer level in terms of risk communication regarding important hazards and really what is actionable, what can consumers do to avoid risks, what are appropriate risk avoidance actions. And in that process, demonstrating responsiveness to incidents and outbreaks in order to ensure that consumers continue to have confidence in the food supply. To draw the circle back to the risk-based approach at the consumer level, monitoring trends and outbreaks in foodborne illness, understanding how exposure is changing with changes in how food is accessed and what foods are consumed, completes the circle of public sector activities that are needed. So in conclusion, there are a wide range of public sector activities that can reinforce and support the private sector efforts along the value chain and can lead to improved safety of food. And it's those kinds of risk-based farm-to-table efforts that are going to be needed to address this important public health challenge. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Well, that I think a great deal of ground has been covered there in those 6 presentations. No shirking the challenge, of course, as we might have expected, but also plenty of suggestions as to how things might proceed from here. So it's time, we have around 20 minutes, so I think, for questions and your comments. If you'd be good enough, please, to say which country or organization you're representing. And also, if you're asking a question and you want to direct it to a particular speaker, then please let us know who that is. Right, hands up. We'll start over on the left and work across. So.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramlawi from Palestine. Really, I have few comments, maybe could be also questions. First, concerning the 6 presentations, they highlighted the microbial contamination, but really nowadays we know that the mortality in developed countries, 60% is related to non-communicable disease, and in developing countries, 80% related to non-communicable disease. And we know that junk food and soft drinks is one of the big factors, risk factors, beyond overweight and obesity, which could cause also cancers, cardiovascular diabetes in the future for our generation. And speaking about food safety, we have also taken into consideration these big elements that nowadays is the challenge for health. The second important issue concerning chemical contamination. Up to this moment, we are speaking about microbial. But what about heavy metals, about pesticides, where there is no specification, no unified legislation? There is also a trafficking of certain pesticides which is inhibited worldwide. And still also we have this issue, especially in developing countries. The third element concerning food supplement. Nowadays, there is a marketing of food supplement, and unfortunately, within food supplement, again, there is no specification and certification all over the world. We saw that some companies, they are mixing certain drugs, like insulin, like also drugs for impotency, where certain drugs are also contraindicated for people suffering from illnesses. And in the same time, we saw this in the even supermarket, and no one doing nothing against that, even in the United States or Europe. The last element concerning OE and FAO, when we are speaking about hormones and antibiotics within animals for meat or for growing the animals or protecting the animals, etc. And we saw that in many countries, children under 6 and 7 years are resistant for certain antibiotics, which is contraindicated for children related to the use of chicken and white meat. These are questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take that as a series of observations, but if anybody wants to come back in a moment and pick up any particular aspect of that. Did I see another question down there? So, over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Fred Segor from Kenya. One of the biggest contribution of aflatoxin is the fact that we don't have dryers, so that for cereals, the dryers may not be, they are not cheap, they are very expensive. So one of the ways of ensuring that these dryers are available is to ensure that the prices are within the reach, so that they are able to be bought from the common farmer in the villages. So I don't know what the FAO can do or the private sector can do so that the dryers can be affordable for the common farmer.
Good. Thank you very much indeed for that specific point about resources and so on. And we'll take one more set of comments or question while we're on that row. We'll go to you, sir. Could you?
Ministry of Health, Sri Lanka.
Thank you.
We have seen instances where food safety is compromised in the name of nutrition quality. Recently, we have seen melamine being, these are sometimes done deliberately, sometimes inadvertently. Melamine being added to milk powder to improve the nitrogen content. And in another instance, we have seen DCD found in milk powder again. These are being added to grass to improve the quality of grass that the cattle grazes. Unfortunately, these attempts or the standards of this safety is being overlooked when food products are exported to food insecure populations in particular. So what my question is whether we can have an international mechanism to curb these attempts.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Let's just pause there in taking the comments and questions. And let me just see, nothing's been addressed to a specific person, but who would like to take up that last was a specific question. Anybody would like to take that up? Maybe David down at the far end. Some of these points collectively certainly could be addressed to the industry, I think, if we can call you the industry here.
Yes, thank you.
If you start us off, thank you.
Certainly, in the last point, I think the use of melamine on purpose or inadvertently, you know, was it about boosting the protein content or the nitrogen content of the raw material, or fooling the Kaldal test, which is used to specify the price that's paid for that material? Certainly, in our experience, from what we've seen, it's more about fooling the test and assuring a better price for the raw material. Melamine's a great example where we had no prior knowledge of its toxicity, and melamine in conjunction with cyanuric acid producing terrible effects on the kidneys, kidney stones, eventually causing death. I think this commercial adulteration that we're seeing, it absolutely needs a global overview. We need to think about how we scan horizons for where these adulterations are taking place and understand the underlying mechanisms. So where there's a financial benefit for a material, where might we see those? Could we predict the sorts of materials that might be effective? For example, milk powder and melamine, understanding the financials, we might have been able to predict it. I think DCD, as I understand it, and I'm not well informed about DCD, is a little bit different. And that there were standards, or at least levels that were accepted, I believe. I might be wrong. But in the class of, you know, unintended or adulteration that's taking place, having a global overview with people who can set standards and have early warning of things that are emerging in the supply chain would be incredibly valuable.
As many reflections as possible. Let's take more, and we can always scoop things up when we go around the panel at the end. I think you wanted to.
Thank you very much. I'm Neil Brisk. I'm the UK permanent representative to the Rome agencies. Thanks very much to all the panelists for a very useful discussion. I think there's a number of takeaways that I have, including the fact that there can be no food security without food safety. If it's unsafe food, is it really food? And Ambassador Mubi's comments about the impact of food loss through diseases within the bigger picture of food losses and waste. I was very interested in Mr. Klepp's presentation of how his country is tackling antimicrobial resistance, which is clearly a growing threat and often an invisible threat with very significant implications for agriculture and livelihoods in developing countries as well. But as we know, the evidence base is patchy. The policy framework is often quite weak. And the ability to identify the threat and the scale of the threat by misuse or counterfeiting of antibiotics in human and animal health is also very weak. So my question is really, what can we do to strengthen the data and to increase the understanding of the public, farmers and the general public in developing countries as quickly as possible? Is there, for example, a greater role that the private sector can play? Mr. Crean mentioned all the testing that his factories do in 140 factories. You know, are there more ways in which education can be spread through different channels to educate people? Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions at the moment? Yes, please, over there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the sharing. I'm Elizabeth Kibuya from Kenya, representing an international organization. I have heard the speakers talk so much about malnutrition and the causes of malnutrition, but we have not touched anything on the transnational, multinational companies that come in the third world countries, take up arable land, and move people. Are they not also contributing to malnutrition in our countries? And how can these companies be controlled?
Anyone else at the moment before I go back to the panel? I need to put a hand up. We got someone there? Right up at the back. Yes, right at the very back. Your point, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Omar Amoko from the International Union of Food and Farm Workers. Thank you very much for the presentation. I see the missing link here is that food safety starts right from the preparation or from the field. So in this context, I would like to know where is the position of the workers as far as safety of food is concerned, because I believe they are the people who are handling it and therefore needs special consideration how they should be motivated to make safe food. For example, considering their condition of employment, considering the lack of training they have, and all these that are necessary for management of safe food. So I think there is a missing link there if they could, panelists, tell us where they consider the workers to be. Thank you.
Got one or two phrases, I think, that come out of those about missing links and areas we haven't covered, and questions raised on that as well from the Kenyan representative. Who would like to start off? And one was directly to you. Why don't you, Dr. Klepp, kick us off, and anybody else join in answering any of the specific points?
Well, thank you. I think a number of really important comments have been made, but I'm just going to address the one about the evidence base being weak, which I do agree with. And of course, a major effort should be directed and to strengthen the evidence-based. And I think such as the EU initiative, the Joint Program Initiative, and lining up a strategic research area is a big importance. I think it would be highly valuable when WHO comes with the burden of disease data next year, which will also help to increase awareness about the magnitude of the problem. And then I think to strengthen screening programs wherever possible, and also I think the industry, which has been alluded to, has a role to play here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that if, as many colleagues said, the unsafe food is not a food, and if food security is not possible without food safety, I think that one important thing is the management of the production, because I take two examples. The aflatoxin, we have problem even in Europe with the climate change. We have an exponential production of aflatoxin, but we know that if we manage better the production, if we cut the grain in the right time, we can reduce. So there is the management agronomic activities that can help the real food security and the food safety. The other example is in the animal health. We know that with the animal welfare and the good practice in the animal husbandry, we can reduce many diseases, we can reduce the use of antibiotics, and we can reduce and we can leave completely the growth promoter. As you know, growth promoter have the best result in the worst husbandry. Worst is the husbandry, better is the result. So this doesn't mean that the growth promoter and the antibiotics cover. It's like a coat that covers the incapacity or the sufficient formation of the people that work in the farm. So I take this example to say all the questions that we had here, I have to manage between OIE and FAO especially, because the link of the production and the disease or uncommunicable disease are linked very strictly with the activities that we can give to the farmer and to the producer.
Thanks very much. Our time now. Let's just take one more round of any final comments or questions before we get the panel themselves, just to sum up the position they see we've reached. Over there, please.
Yes, Susan Corning, also from OIE, and I would like to obviously endorse the comments that were made by Dr. Marabelli, and also respond specifically to the question about finding antibiotics that were used in animals in children, and assure you that the World Organization for Animal Health and FAO and other organizations have been working together. And in fact, we have compiled, both us and WHO, lists of critical antimicrobials for use in both human and animal medicine. And we are working on restricting certain ones that are especially important, and particularly restricting their use in growth promotion and preventative use without clinical disease. We're also monitoring, or setting up a program at the moment for monitoring the quantities and the usage patterns throughout the world. So this is a concern, it's acknowledged, and we're working on it. And I think this is a great forum to recognize that animal health is also important, very much so, to food safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other points? I don't see any more. And thank you for all of those. We're going to go around the panel once more now with what you might call a take-home message. What we'd like you to do in this, as we sweep through all of you, is to just sort of forget the constraints of policy and resources and so on for a moment. And if there is going to be a great deal more attention, as it seems there could be, on food safety over these coming months, over the next year or so, and galvanizing the public as well, people who aren't experts in this field, what is the message that you feel it's going to be very important that comes out of this session and leads us into those next few months? So a bit of blue skies thinking, but I've got, we had that final observation there, and if you might want to pick up on, and if I could just throw one thing in, just from sheer observation as a journalist around in the developing world a good bit, I don't think we've had any reference to what you might call indigenous food, the kind of food that people particularly resort to at times of emergency, eating local plants and leaves and so on, but also at other times as well when family budget is very tight. I've never been clear in my own mind whether those are inherently unsafe foods or not, whether there's any particular distinction, whether that's a very sensible thing that people do alongside all the enticement that there is for them to turn to more processed foodstuffs. So if anybody could answer that, I'd be grateful. I don't know whether anybody else would. The safety of, or otherwise, of indigenous foods. Dr. Subasinghe, last time you were representing your speaker. Let's have you speaking in your own right to start us off now with the take-home message from the panel.
I think we have to look at when it comes to developed countries, we have multifaceted approaches for ensuring food safety, and security. But in this respect, I think each country has their own specific approaches. There's no hard and fast rule which can be applied to each and every country. For example, the case of histamine in fish. Now, in my country, histamine in fish, anything 50, we believe 50 micrograms per 100 is the cutoff point for safety. But I see fish with even 800 micrograms of fish, histamine, being marketed, and people are happily eating it and survive, and there is no visible negative effects. But again, so can we reject this fish? It's in the food chain. It's the food for somebody. So I think it's a relative thing, you know. But I'm not saying that we should not look at food safety. It's very important. But we have our own issues, the nutritional issue, the food security issue. So we cannot just blindly, you know, negate these issues as something fit or unfit. It's a country-specific approach, I would say.
Maybe? How about you next?
I think it's clear that there is really no food security without food safety. But the farm-to-fork approach, multi-stakeholder approaches, and then also national action, which involves many stakeholders, but also global action, because it's obviously emerging that there are many global issues that need more monitoring. And I think they all need to be based on better evidence so that one can mobilize both at national level and also at global level. And I think the evidence will assist us in that approach. But really, food safety should be an issue that we should be looking at, but with better evidence. Thank you very much.
David Green.
Thank you. Kind of parting thought. I think the power of clear evidence-based standards for food safety is very obvious, and they're essential. They should be the basis for regulation, which preferably is enforced. There's a lot of regulation that isn't enforced, and that isn't always helpful. And I think, just referring to one of the comments that came from the back, at the end of the day, food safety relies on a lot of people doing things right, day after day, and to make sure that we have people who are educated and supported and valued in the food supply chain is key.
Thank you. Dr. Marabelli?
Yeah, I want to stress 2 points. One is the food energy is the real challenge for the future, much more than what was in the past when the oil energy was the first one. So we have to take in consideration the social and the security situation in front of this problem of the food energy enough for everybody. And the second one is, like my colleague, the question of rules. Everybody of us, we participate in the international organization. Everybody of us collaborate to the rules coming out of this international organization, but unfortunately the single country or group of countries introduce different rules, and this kind of situation make confusion and create a problem, especially for developing countries, to enter in the market. So I think that we have to be honest in front of our participation in international organization, and then to have a correct approach in the application of these rules. Otherwise, the developing countries have problem to enter in the international market. Thank you very much.
Good. Dr. Clapp.
Thank you. I agree that national action is important and critical, but I would also like to emphasize the need for international action, as has been pointed out by several, and having regulations in place, and particularly focus on mechanism for securing enforcement of existing regulations. Finally, I want to also point to the link to non-communicable diseases that has been made, and I think it is clear that food safety will contribute to increased nutritional status and also to the prevention of non-communicable diseases.
Thank you. And you get to wrap it up again, Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would just like to say that I think it's long past time to talk about focusing on food safety for domestic food consumers in developing countries, and am very heartened by this side event and by the comments that have been made here. We have quite a bit of evidence now on the export supply chains, and I was happy to hear that we did not actually focus on that here. We have evidence that, in fact, safe food can be produced in less developed countries, that higher incomes can be captured by smallholders. Very, very modest spillovers so far, however, from those export supply chains. And really, it's time to move on and think about how those models can be applied more broadly for the benefit of food insecure populations. And finally, that in that process, there are global public goods that will support those efforts. And again, lots of good thinking here about how to support and move forward those kinds of monitoring, risk assessment, global analysis of data. And so those will be important global public goods to support food safety in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Nobody answered my point about indigenous traditional foodstuffs. I've got to take my investigations elsewhere, or anybody have a thought on it? No, don't think I'm going to get it answered. Thank you very much indeed for attending what, to me, as absolutely somebody who has no expertise in this field, has been an extremely interesting discussion, and your comments and questions put as well have helped that along. It just strikes me that an absolutely key factor is going to be the actual enforcement, the implementation of all the ambitions that have been coming to light here, and that it requires a much more perhaps of an alignment of policies in all sorts of areas than we often see in public policy making. But there obviously is a huge issue, a compelling issue, and I very much hope that my own industry, if I can call it that, journalism, will pay perhaps more attention to it than has been the case in the past. When I was thinking back to the sort of 1970s and 1980s and campaigning in these fields, I think the phrase was always feed the world, and maybe that should change now to feed the world safely. Thank you.